I just finished speaking with Adam Grant, Creative Director at AKQA Melbourne. Adam's background is in copywriting. He worked at Naked Communications, and before that he worked in advertising at Saatchi & Saatchi. We spoke about Adam's role at AKQA, and we spoke about a project he's been working on where he used design fiction to envision the future of his client's industry. He's a great guy with lots of interesting ideas. I hope you learn as much as I did. So, you're a creative director at AKQA in the R&D department, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So could you tell me a little bit about that role?
Yeah, so I guess there's lots of different types of creative director. Maybe I should start actually by giving a bit of an explanation for R&D. So R&D at AKQA Melbourne is, there are really three teams. So there's kind of a core research and development team. There's an accelerator team that is specific to Bunnings, one of our major clients. And then there's a third team that is kind of a bit of a virtual team at the moment. We're not always working together. We kind of pull a team together depending on what briefs are coming through the agency. That is a bit more of a story-led version of R&D. So there are these three teams, but we all kind of talk to each other. There's a bit of flux between them and try to stay across each other's work. But they're the three main kind of columns of R&D. And I work across mostly R&D and the story. We call it Story Lab. Those two parts of R&D offering. I guess what's common across all creative directors everywhere, I imagine, is that the role of not just overseeing, but overseeing with a view and having a view on things and the direction of projects that you can apply at a very high level in directing, the tone of something or the direction of a thing that's being created, or also get really down in the detail and actually help with the craft, but always having that view and being able to step back from it and provide another insight. That can be really hard to see when you're in it all the time. Yeah. So I see my role as being largely that, but I also do a lot. I mean, I've got a copywriting background. I come from a more traditional advertising background. So I also, I carry a pencil habitually. Yeah. So I do a lot of writing as well for different projects across the studio.
Okay, so you're really talking about ideas at their highest level, conceptual, multidisciplinary. Do you have a preferred discipline, or is it across everything?
Yeah, I mean, across everything. That's also a necessary part of it. Although I know my strengths, and my strengths are writing, and they're in concepts. And we've been, since lockdown. It's funny, before this call we were talking about the different ways in which work has changed, and we've been doing a lot of audio-based work recently because we don't have video production in-house, but we have some, I have some audio editing skills, so I'm able to get into that, and it's been a really good thing to be able to lean on at this strange time.
Yeah. Okay. It interests me how copywriting is usually a core skill of creative directors. My kind of assumption on that is that you're dealing with ideas on their rawest form. You're writing and you're making them. It's like a tool to help you think. Is that right?
I think maybe. I also think there's probably a bit of bias in there as well, where the writer, in a lot of agencies, there's a writer and an art director paired together, and they kind of go off and respond to a brief together, and they divide up the tasks equally and often do the concepting equally. But then it, of course, falls on the writer to articulate what they've created together and often, in my experience anyway, being in the room with the client, you kind of introduce it. You kind of, because you've written the words, you can speak them better than probably anyone else in the room, and so it kind of falls on you. And for that reason, perhaps it's often the copywriters that become creative directors. Yeah. But I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the ability to articulate an idea, I think writing definitely helps with that, doesn't it? Do you start many of your projects by writing copy nowadays?
Yeah, I think I do a lot of reading. I try to read really widely, even when there is no brief in front of me. And when a brief does come in, I think that's probably my first thing to do, is just go read around it. You know, try to find the story behind the problem. I do a bit of a language exercise though, which is like trying to go perpendicular. Is that perpendicular from the brief? Try to find some analogs in other places. I wish I had a ready-made example for you of how I think that works sometimes. But I think sometimes by not kind of directly staring at the problem and instead looking to an analog on either side of it, you can come to some interesting, you know, lots of creatives talk about collisions in creative practice. And I think by, you know, not thinking of the magazine, so you're making a magazine, not thinking of it as print, but thinking of it as a walking tour or something like that, and using the language of tour as something to understand this actual physical thing that you're trying to make, as a way to just bring in new thoughts.
Yeah.
So that's
really what this video series is about for me. It's about finding analogies in other areas of design and how people approach their work. Because I very much like to look at things like that as well, as in patterns and themes, and how can you reapply them. And I think it's good because you're coming up with things that are transferable to many domains, and you can take them forward. We did a ideation technique once that I really enjoyed. That was it was basically brainstorming words around a particular theme, but then you have to create a link back to one of those random words to your design challenge. And you come up with some crazy ideas. Really enjoy that kind of stuff.
Do you mean like creating new words or just finding new words to apply?
So say, for example, there was a challenge here that you need to come up with a new feature for X product. Then the ideation or the brainstorming would be around, for example, your topic is bedtime. So then you have to write all of the different words that you associate with bedtime, and you go off on a tangent. So you might say cozy, slippers, cup of tea, warmth, and you just go off. And then that very last word that you have, which will usually be very abstract, you know, it could be anything. You know, maybe you've got a teddy bear that's like a dolphin, so maybe you ended up on dolphin or something like that. You then have to connect that back to your design challenge, and forced connection.
Yeah. I think sometimes like accidents can be really fruitful, of like literally seeing something out of the corner of your eye and misunderstanding it, or hearing someone mumble through something they've thought or read or written, and misunderstanding them. And I think it's the same thing. Your brain's just desperately trying to make a connection between these two completely unrelated things. And then you create this kind of ugly, deformed thing that, like, you know, one time out of 1,000 is actually of real value.
Yeah, those are my favorite ones.
Yeah, it can be really fun.
Yeah. So you recently explored design fiction on one of your projects.
Yeah. Well, we're still kind of in it in a way. So we've been working on. So it's still ongoing, and it's actually an internal project for this client. So there's not that much that I can talk about it, I don't think, specifically. But yeah, we're basically engaged by to help them to I guess expand their view on what the future post their current roadmap might look like through a design fiction. And yeah, so we're kind of just wrapping it up now, but it's been a really fun experience. We do a lot of similar kinds of work within R&D, but they tend to, I would describe them more as critical design rather than design fiction exercises.
Maybe it's worth clarifying what we mean by design fiction. I guess I would articulate it as creating fictional narratives to explore and analyze ideas in potential future scenarios.
I would agree with that. I mean, like on a really crude level, like it's kind of just science fiction in a way, right? Like you're just taking something, you're speculating on the future, but with a purpose.
Yes.
And maybe that's a defining feature of the design fiction, is that it has some purpose. You're taking a concept from today and you're dropping it into a fictional world as a means to understand what unintended consequences there might be of that thing in that place, in that new ecosystem. But all these terms, I actually find that the terminologies of design really unnecessarily confusing sometimes. There's a lot of overlap. And it can, I think, sometimes be a barrier to a practice or an instinct that I don't think is exclusive to design at all. Lots of like science fiction, it's been around for like 100 years or something, and architects do work in speculation all the time. Through speculative.
It really is just that process of speculate. It's a medium for speculation, isn't it? I think that's how I like to articulate it. But you're right. Like I guess I've kind of intentionally stayed away from clarifying like the semantics around the different approaches, because you've got speculative design, generational design, critical design, design fiction. I kind of dipped into them, and they all kind of seemed fairly similar to me. But why was this chosen for this particular project?
It was actually within the brief, so it had to be a design fiction. Although if you'd taken that out of the brief, we still would have responded in the same way. I think. But why was it in the brief? I think because the purpose of this project is to expand the thinking of a set group of people, teams within the organization, about what the future could be. So working in, there's a graph actually. If you like Google design fiction and go to images, assuming you're in Google, it'll show you this like funnel of possible, plausible, and some other thing that starts with P. And it's kind of working in the space of the plausible, of it's like not completely wild and out of the realms of possibility, but it's pushing at the walls of what you would normally think is possible.
So it's possibly technically feasible, but just out of reach in terms of the budget and resources.
Maybe I'm completely misunderstanding this graph, like, because I never really learned this stuff. Like I kind of learned it along the way. But it all seems to make sense. Again, I think it's like quite an intuitive kind of process for any creative person to go on to think, well, that's probable. What's possible or what's plausible? How far can we stretch this before the world pops and reality gushes back in?
So I was interested to speak to you about it because you're applying it in a commercial setting, and a client has requested this of you. So there must be some direct value coming from that. Are you saying that it's just expanding the horizon, basically?
I think it's probably quite useful. I think it's probably useful for all organizations, including my own, and probably useful for non-organizations, for individuals as well, to regularly interrogate the things that they know, or the things that they think they will know or will do in the future with some kind of fictional world building exercises. Because, where does this stuff come from? Like, we're all, I think particularly at the moment, we live in a very, I think there's a bit of an illusion that we live in a really information rich society at the moment, and we've just, we have access to every single kind of written page ever wrote. But actually, once you sit down at your terminal screen or pick up your smart brick and look for something, you're kind of being fed just a very small portion of something that is usually going through some kind of algorithmic process. And I get a lot of SpaceX rocket launches whenever I go discovering, and I make jokes that I don't even like rockets, but YouTube thinks that I should, and so it keeps pushing this stuff to me. And as a consequence, I kind of pseudo like rockets. But yeah, anyway, sorry. So I guess anyone within an organization, you're making these roadmaps for the future, for future products or services or culture. Where are you going to get it from? And I think design fiction is a really good, it's licensed to go broad, to provoke. And that was in the brief as well, provoke us, make us feel uncomfortable about our brand and what the brand will be in the future. So we really took that and ran with it.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I came across design fiction. I read some stuff a long time ago, and it was always in the back of my head. But progressively over the last year or so, I started to think more and more around how lean and agile has affected the work processes in software development. And we're getting really good at hypothesis-driven design, incremental improvements, I guess innovation over a long period through continuous iterations. But my question was, where do the big leaps come from? And how do you get outside of that box to imagine something bigger than what the data points are currently telling you about your current situation? But where I kind of got stuck on it was, to those kinds of people that are scientific, evidence-led, my feeling was that speculation might be a bit airy-fairy for them. So I went down the rabbit hole of trying to understand what are the uses of this and how can I apply it in my setting. But for me personally, I like the process of speculation because it's fun, because it does expand your horizons, but also because the analysis of that outcome gives you a more thorough understanding of where you're at today. So I guess if you can get a deliverable out of it, or at least you can get a view of the North Star, I hate to say that, of the roadmap, then that's really useful. But also you just get a more thorough understanding of where you are now, because I guess in order to speculate about the future, you need to understand the key variables of today, and then also understand what some of the barriers might be moving forward. And then what happens when you project or extrapolate into the future and encounter these things. And does that change the way that you act now?
Yeah. I think a big part of it as well is about identifying problems and designing problems. They say design better problems, which allows you to break free of what you kind of touched on there, which is this kind of solutionist approach to specifically technological design and systems design, and trying to, quantize and reduce all the time to get the perfect solution to something. But process of design fiction and critical design throws a spanner in and creates tensions in there. So it kind of bursts your impression of a perfect world. The example always given is sliding doors in science fiction films of kind of techno-utopian societies where you don't even see the machine working, you just see the beautiful interface. And we kind of live in that world a little bit now, but I think that's my favorite aspect anyway of critical design, is the license it gives you to disagree with something and to take something quite uncomfortable and drop it in their lap or throw it in their face. Maybe that's a bit violent, but and I think they need and enjoy it. You know, like not everyone loved Black Mirror. It wasn't everyone's cup of tea because it was really dark, and some of it was very dark. But you kind of can't not remember it. Like people hold on to that, and no doubt it's had an impact on engineers and designers and managers, all types of people, because they've got this scarred image of the future in their head that they're now aware is possible.
Yeah, it raises a question around technological determinism. Are we destined for that route and for that dystopian future, or does being aware of those things change the way that we act today, and therefore design our future?
I don't know.
That's another good role for it. Is it you can play moral dilemmas?
Yeah.
So when you picked this up, when you saw on the brief that there was a request for a design fiction exploration, what was your initial reaction, and what did you do after?
I think I read the brief 5 or 6 times just to make sure I was getting it right, because it was an incredible brief. You know, it's not often you're asked specifically to do this, given permission to go and do this. So that was the first thing I did, just check the document. Then I guess we put a team together. So we were keen to create some artifacts for this future world that we were being asked to build. That might not be necessarily literal objects that would be interpreted as finished kind of designs or even prototypes of a future experience, but just kind of props almost to help deliver parts of the story. So we're really fortunate to be able to bring on a few people from the team who had kind of different experiences in design. So I had an industrial designer join the team, a design researcher with a background in scientific research was able to join. We had another graphic designer, and myself. So yeah, just kind of tried to be really smart about who we wanted to have on this brief in this sprint. So we ran it in a 3-week sprint to just set us up for success, because I think that's particularly when time is compressed to that extent, you really need people working together who are able to kind of think outside their expertise, but also have specific knowledge in key areas that we might want to exploit through the project. Yeah. So that was just kind of setting the room up, really. But it was a few days of that, of funnily enough, probably going through a bit of a futuring exercise of like, what happens when you put these two people together? Because none of us had ever worked together before.
Okay.
And I mean, it worked beautifully in the end. It's like we all really enjoyed the process.
Okay, so you reviewed the brief, pulled a team together, set up the space, time boxed it. What was the first task that you set, or that you set the team?
So we had to do some research. So because this is an internal project for internal stakeholders, we were required really to get as much insight from key people within the organization as we could. So we did some interviewing that probably went over 3 or 4 day periods. We interviewed, I think, 6 people, quite extensive interviews.
Yeah.
Not just to get an idea of the actual roadmap of where they were heading as a company and the projects that they're working on, but also we put some stuff in there to try to get at, what are they really excited about, or what concerns them about the future, and trying to strip them out of the brand itself. So of course we wanted to know a lot about the company and its organization and its trajectory, but also as a human being, what are you thinking and feeling? Like, what's keeping you up at night? What do you want to do in life? All of that stuff. So we could get an idea of that really fuller picture of them as I guess a little mini cultural unit.
Yeah. And this is all with a view of trying to be able to paint a picture of what the future might hold.
Yeah, we wanted to be able to take their existing insights and their feelings and extrapolate that out into a future world, okay, with some bolt-ons, with some additional research and some additional speculation from ourselves. But that was the very first thing that we definitely needed to do, and that I did some of those interviews. Lana, the designers on the team, did some of those interviews, and then kind of concurrently, we embarked on an exercise of just writing, just creating stories, and in as detailed a form as a headline that might describe a future event, to full 2,000-word short stories, which was, I mean, quite natural for me. Although it's always scary to kind of face a blank page and have to put a whole new thought on it. Mm-hmm. But the whole team got involved in that, which was amazing as well. And so it was like story time at the end of every day. Yeah. Read each other the stories that we'd written. And so by the time that we'd completed that research phase of interviewing the stakeholders, we had something like 22, 23 pages of just fiction that we kind of vomited onto a page. That's a little bit of this and a little bit of like the Scientific American article that we read about the future of oral health, and just getting ideas down so that once we had all the pieces, we could start putting them together.
So this is like ideating through kind of like scrapbooking, storytelling, capturing snippets of the future.
Yeah. I mean, I guess all of this has changed as well. Like, we've not mentioned COVID. It's probably a record.
Yeah.
But because we're living and working in this weird environment at the moment, which is all through the rectangle, we had to, I think usually we'd find a space, we'd find a room, and we'd try to make that room as safe as possible, have a door on it and a whiteboard, and we'd be workshopping in the air, but we didn't have that privilege. So we had to find a new canvas, and since we ultimately knew that we would end up with fictions, we thought, well, we'll just start writing. We'll let all of our naivety out in the first week so that we can start building up from that.
Yeah, that's cool.
So it was good. It was a really fun exercise. It's something that I think I will probably try to do more of, regardless of whether the project is strictly a design fiction or not.
Yeah, that sounds refreshing. I do like that approach of writing about ideas before sharing them. There was another technique that I was hoping to find a place for. It's like silent ideation, but through writing. So, for example, you get two people up on a whiteboard, and you have a word or a question in the middle of the whiteboard, and you just take turns adding to that question. So, the question might be, how do we design this? And you might say, who's the customer? And then I might list a customer, and because it's silent, you're able to just flow quite freely without censoring your ideas before you put them out there. I've not tried it, but it sounds interesting to me.
Yeah, there's like oblique strategies, I think it's called. It's a card. I think Brian Eno maybe created this card deck that is like feeding you things. You're like, it takes some agency away from you in creating the story, but you have to fill the gaps. So it just gets you writing, just gets stuff on the page.
Yeah. So this part of the process, when you guys are capturing all these snippets and stories from the future, when they're brought back to you, what is it that you're looking for? Is there something that's right and wrong, or is it more around exciting or interesting?
I don't think it'd be completely true to say there's no right and wrong. I think, but it's definitely just looking for the thing that's interesting, or the thing that I love the pub test for ideas, of taking something to the pub with a friend or something and just letting something slip out, just saying, I was thinking this thing the other day after like 2 beers, and then seeing how they respond to that. And if they kind of acknowledge it and move on, then I don't know, maybe it's not so great. But if they like hook on it and respond and build on it, or they laugh at it, or they're angry at you for saying it, or any of these things, like if it provokes like deeper engagement, then maybe there's something there. And I think that's probably what those reviews were. It wasn't, no one was getting judged on the quality of their writing or their scene building or anything like that, but rather what's on this page or what's in this story that's interesting to us. And why is it interesting, and can we make it more interesting by taking a bit of that and a bit of this and like jamming it together. So yeah, like quite a free, fluid, probably frustrating at first process. It feels quite gratuitous as well, to spend time doing this. But I think ultimately we're kind of richer for it, having done it. If for no other reason than it got us talking to each other really freely and openly and without fear.
Yeah. Okay. So was that one of the principles of the project, or how you decided to work with each other, was that you would follow the trail, see what you gravitate towards, to see what people are intrigued by?
I think every project should be a bit like that.
Yeah.
If not completely, really. I mean, I understand not every brief is going to give you full scope to, go climb up the mountain.
Yeah.
But it's at least how I like to approach these things, to really like lay it all out. Try to forget the brief for a second, and instead just try and rather follow the scent, like you say, like find what's interesting here. It's not a comfortable process. I think like these things always seem really inspiring or interesting or clever after the fact, but actually when you're in it, when you're in the mud, it's not particularly nice. It can be quite scary when you're just, you can't smell it yet, there's no inspiration, but it'll come eventually.
Yeah, that's it. You're just facing into ambiguity, complexity. You're going to find your way out eventually. It's the same with all projects, isn't it? But it can also be difficult to pitch for resources for a project that you don't know the outcome as well. Quite often people want to see what they're investing in, which is why this process is particularly intriguing for me, because it is really just following that trail. You don't know what you're going to get out the other end. You just have to trust the process. So you guys are world building at the moment, then you're collecting these stories, you're discussing them. What are your next steps? What are you trying to move towards?
I guess then we had to, and then after that, it's kind of imposing some discipline and really trying to marry those two parts of the process together, the research and the insights, and some of the very clear pictures of future experiences or future products or outcomes, trying to marry those with not just the narrative fictions that we created, but also some of the kind of hard arc academic works that we might have come across on that journey as well. So just trying to weave them all together in some kind of beautiful tapestry that made sense and had some order to it. And what was really important for this project was not just creating a story, not just like building a world, but turning that world into something that could be experienced in, we basically have an hour to kind of give this experience to people. So thinking about what that might look like, again, it was something that we really didn't even talk about until halfway through the process, because it seemed in a way, to me at least, unnecessary. Like, why would we talk about how we tell this story until we know the story? Like that's ultimately what we'll be judged on. So we kind of got into that a little bit after we developed all of these materials.
So you hadn't yet decided what the specific, the format of the deliverable would be?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe in like the back of my head, I had a thought of where it might go, but no, I don't think we even really had a serious discussion about it until week 2,
Okay.
and probably mid-end of week 2, to be
Yeah.
honest. Just trying to trust the process, and if week 1 was about research and week 2 was about putting those parts together, trusting that we would have them together in a form that was clear enough so that by the 3rd week we could just put ourselves into production mode and make it.
Okay. So how are you bridging the gap between the discovery and production? Because you've kind of gone broad, you've explored, then you've put some constraints around it. How are you then making that next step towards what are we designing?
I think it just happened in a moment, to be honest. I started reading a book by Tim Morn, who's actually this book, Infinite Detail. It might be his first novel, actually. It's quite good. And there were some components, or there were some parts of this book, and specifically the audiobook, actually, that really stuck with me. And I shared that around with the team. And we just started using the book as a bit of a vessel, or at least the kind of structure, or some of the storytelling methods used within the book as a vessel to contain our own story.
Yeah.
I don't know what Tim Morn would think of that, of us using his book in that way. Like, we've not infringed on his IP in any way whatsoever. But that was really it. I mean, that's kind of the lucky spark, I think. We didn't spend heaps of time thinking production. We didn't go through storyboarding. We didn't consider building grand prototypes or robots or anything like that. Though we may have had that spark not come.
Yeah. Okay. So we're really saying then that once you've described that world, you've put some constraints around it, the next phase is actually just now articulating that in a way, or putting that into a format that other people can envision.
Yeah, like thinking of it as a performance. I think we started changing our language a little bit around the project itself, and like I was saying a little bit earlier about using analogs as a way to move something forward or move it in a different, interesting direction, started using kind of dramatic terminology in order to describe this thing that we were creating. And so sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, so did you then, so once you've got the vision for this world, did you then pick an aspect of that had a problem that you were going to solve? Was there an artifact specifically that you designed? Or
we did, yeah. We did some of these things in parallel, which is like kind of cheating a little bit. We just kind of trusted that we would end up at the right. Because we were really pushed for time, we kind of necessarily had to start some processes going around the design of artifacts, and even the titles of chapters, that we might create. Let's just lock on that, and because it feels right, and we'll start to marry them throughout the production.
Yeah.
It's probably not what you're supposed to do. Again, like, we're kind of feeling our way through the process, not following a guide, although we probably had a few guides up on our screens for ways in which other people have followed similar processes. But we were just still in a way following that sense. We did start thinking also in terms of like universes. So, the Marvel universe is like the classic example, but actually astrology is the classic example, right? Of inscribing stories in one frame, and multiple stories that can be teased out, and they all sit next to each other and can be understood as a collective. We kind of decided on that as well, of like, well, we understand the future physics of this world and what's happened to society and what technological developments have been made. Let's just run 4 stories through that world and find points later at which they can intersect. I want to tell you more, but I feel like there's some spoilers. But yeah, what we decided was to essentially fracture that universe. So it would be one cohesive universe to us, but we'd fracture it and not really let anyone experience not let anyone experience the whole thing in totality in one sitting. We'll give each person just a bit of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And we'll put it on them to connect it later, which is a bit of a risky move, I think. But
I mean, if you grasp it, it's earned.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That makes sense. So you're now starting to run scenarios in that world, and then I guess create some artifacts that help people to imagine that world through those artifacts.
Yeah, they're kind of like, I'm not a game maker or even really a gamer, but I'm interested in games, and I really like the concept of the vertical slice. That is something that is often used in game development. So once you have created the world and once you understand the physics and some of the features of that world, you run a vertical slice through it and just create a sample as a means to test some of those assumptions that you've made in your head of how this game might play out. So we effectively came up with a world and then did 4 slices through it.
Okay, I think I understand. Yeah, so you do have a world in mind, broad strokes of a world,
Yeah,
but then you've picked
I could write it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I get you.
yeah.
It's like when you see the trailer for a game, there's a backstory and there's all this stuff going on, but when you actually play the game, there's one path you follow, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's like I could write the novel now. It wouldn't be a good novel, but I could write you the novel of this world because we talk all the way around it, and then we decided for 4 separate elements that we wanted to flesh out.
Are you due to pitch this sometime soon, or have you already shared it with the client?
It's pretty much finished, and funnily enough, the client has put an enormous amount of trust in us to deliver it with very little oversight from them. So
it's what you need.
Yeah, it's also terrifying, because with
the big reveal.
So yeah, I mean, it's pretty much ready to ship. We're just we're trying to package it separately so that it can be not scaled but redistributed if they wish to do that in the future. So so this isn't just something that will occur in one place at one time. They can send it with instructions, like a situationist artwork or something, and have it unfold in the room there.
Yeah. Well, maybe one day we can chat again and you can tell me more when it's all revealed.
Yeah. When we're doing the Netflix series of
Yeah. So how are you feeling about it then? The whole process, like the output, everything?
I think the first thing after any project is relief that it's not all burned down. But also really satisfied. I mean, we had a wrap meeting late last week, and we'd done a lot of reading around world building and different elements of design fictions and different methodologies, and I pulled out a quote. It's actually finding its way into the experience about what a world is, and the definition is something along the lines of a world is something that outlives its creator and continues to create tension, or something like that. And I feel like we did succeed in that because we overthought it and we created the physics of the space before we went in and tried to color in the picture. It does feel like it could live on afterwards, whether or not anyone chooses to do that. I don't know.
Yeah. So that's great. That's a great outcome to aspire to, is just leaving a lasting impression that helps shape people's perceptions and ideas moving forward. It's like a catalyst for ideation in the future, I guess.
Yeah. It's a strange thing, we're all obviously really hanging out and wanting to know how it's received in the room, and I would pay a significant amount of money to be invisible in the room as it's happening. But on the other hand, I'm quite satisfied with just the act of creation. It's rare to get a brief like this that allows you so much freedom to say uncomfortable things or create unlikely scenarios, to create something that doesn't need to scale or doesn't need to sell, or doesn't require people to obey, so just like, I think that glow will linger for a little while, probably for the next couple of projects. But it's something I think we all get into this business to make stuff, right? So
that's right. Yeah,
it's good to have made something.
So what will you take from this project into your other projects? Are there learnings, techniques, attitudes that you hope to hold on to?
Yeah, definitely. I think I want to do more of this in my kind of day job. So hopefully we can use it as a way to kind of get more of this kind of work. I weirdly have a kind of side project that is not completely removed from this space either. It's probably started a bit more in critical design, but that I'd actually put on ice a couple of months ago because I couldn't work it out. I couldn't work out how to get this thing made that I want. So I'm going to be really cryptic. I want to create quite a complex product object for which I have none of the skills required to make. And so I decided a while ago to actually, well, maybe I can make this like a networked book of effectively like a process diary, a live process diary, which I can invite people into to overlay their thoughts. And I don't know if you've ever experienced kind of the networked book thing, but it's effectively, well, Wikipedia is a networked book, for example, of just adding layer upon layer of information about a very specific project that is in flux. I decided that might be an interesting approach, but I didn't have the confidence to really name what I was doing and or go forward with it. And I think maybe this project has given me a bit of that confidence to go, no, you can just spend your afternoon writing stories about this thing and it will lead you somewhere interesting. Mm-hmm. So I think it's been good personally for me in that way.
Yeah.
So it's very cryptic.
It was very cryptic. I was like, do I know what he's talking about?
Yeah.
But I agree that I think we need more of this in our day-to-day work, just the time to think freely without constraints, then, not feeling like you need to censor your ideas, letting them flourish, knowing that the outcome may change and it's just about following that trail. I definitely want more of that.
Yeah, I think technology and design, where design intersects technology, could definitely do with more of this kind of thinking and more of these kinds of projects, because I think the whole move fast and break things approach to technological builds and innovation has just been so proven wrong so definitely just in the last couple of years. And I think I really love speculative architecture. Like, it's one of my favorite things to read about. I have very little actual knowledge about architecture, but I love the worlds that are created in that discipline and in that practice. And it astounds me that it seems to have gone missing in technology. You can see it back in the early days of kind of Ted Nelson and very early Silicon Valley, but you don't see so much of it outside of media art at the moment. And I think that it's something that is our responsibility to do. So
I wonder if we've overcorrected for a really cumbersome, slow, expensive software development process, I mean, I think it's great. We've figured out how to work very fast. We've figured out how to learn as we go and be lean and agile. Like, that's great. But that's a tool in the toolbox. What else is there? That's where my head's at the moment.
That's right. Yeah. And none of this stuff lasts. Like, internet archaeology is a new field that the archaeological foundations of the internet don't go down very deep. You know, like, go to archive.org and you'll see how frequently things are just stripped bare and started again, you know. So, and yet we still tend to treat these things as if they're going to remain forever and require really strong foundations. And I just think we can, you know, loosen up a little bit, accept that things are much more in flux and out of our control than we want them to be, and just embrace it and lean into it and design for different outcomes, and to be ready in the event that the internet goes down. We lose the internet tomorrow. You know, there's a solar flare and we can't do Zoom anymore. Zoom ceases to be a thing. What do we do now? You know, like, what happens to our, like, that's a crazy scenario. That's like probably the most extreme that you give to any like front end dev. Like, what happens if you don't have the internet now? But I think it's an exercise worth doing. It makes you need to interrogate all of the assumptions you have about a human experience.
Yeah, I like to think about how, when we've all gone into lockdown, we're all working remotely. How did that pressure affect the guys at Zoom and people running video conference software? And did the features that they've released since, did they already have them on their roadmap? Or was the influx of customers and the different use cases a catalyst for new ideas? I'd be interested to hear about that.
Well, I remember there was that period where people could just drop into your Zoom chat, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, all the stories we heard about that were kind of gross. And but actually, I kind of think it's a beautiful thing. Like, my favorite thing about working from home and having these meetings over video chat is the moment when someone shared their link and you accidentally move into the next half-hour increment, and suddenly there are new people that you didn't expect in this, what is otherwise a really controlled environment.
Yeah. Bumping into each other in the meeting room.
Yeah, I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's great. Thank you very much for the time talking about that. I hope to maybe get more of an insight in the future once you're able to reveal more. And also, your side project sounds helpful. Sounds interesting as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
That's all for this time. I'll put a few links to some of the things that we mentioned in the description. Catch you next time.